Hello and welcome to Melee's Turnwheel, the series that takes a retroactive look at the Fire Emblem series chapter by chapter. I'm your host, I'm Melee Kirby, and today we're taking it back to chapters 21, 22, 23, and 23X of Fire Emblem The Blazing Blade. So, it's been a little while since the last episode, and I realize that, I apologize. As per usual, I could give a laundry list of different reasons, I think most of which are valid, but honestly, I'm going to cut straight to the chase here and just say one of the biggest reasons, if not the biggest reason, is that these chapters sucked ass, and I really didn't feel passionate about them or interested in talking about them. And I mean, sometimes that's just going to happen, right? They're just going to be they're going to be episodes where we just have a straight shot of bad maps that aren't that interesting. I mean, that's not even that true, because honestly, there are a lot of interesting things to say about some of these maps. But man, did they ever suck to play. I was not a big fan of most of these maps. One of them was okay, and we'll talk about that when we get there. But for right now, let's go ahead and talk about the question of last episode, which I am going to go double check because it's been so long that I forgot. Okay, yes. What is your least favorite guiding requirement in the series? 19XX is cheating. Making a joke about the game Fire Emblem Gaiden will be punished by execution. At SuperUserPerson says, if FE7 is off the table, then I guess having to trail Douglas's fat ass across FE6 Chapter 16 while also dealing with 50 other side objectives is pretty tedious. That is reasonable. At Biozilla follows up with a very similar comment. Stop chasing me, Douglas. Way more succinct and to the point there, but getting across the same message. And then finally, at Wig Luff, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Wig __ Luff. FE11, you need to kill a total of 41 playable characters in order to see 20x. Now, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I am going to argue that the death guiding requirements in FE11 are peak fiction. Goat, raw fire, the whole 9 yards. However, I will admit that that number is a little excessive. I do not think you needed to kill that many characters, but I don't think that you should have been required to kill that many characters. I mean, realistically, again, I'm getting ahead of myself, but the idea is that you are getting them. They aren't extra content that you should be striving to get. If anything, getting guidance in FE11 should feel like a bad thing, because it means that you're fucking up so bad and all your units are dying. And we can go back and forth on whether or not that's a good gameplay philosophy, or a good game design philosophy. I personally kind of think it's cool just because it's interesting and different from how the rest of the series handles things, but I can understand that not being up everyone's alley. However, I do think that looking at them as objectives to be reached by killing people off is kind of misguided, because I think they're a fail state. So yeah, I don't know, just food for thought. Anyway, chapter 16X is really obnoxious, I can agree. And the death guidance from FE11, understandable. I am going to be honest, I do not have a great answer for this off the top of my head, especially as we moved towards the back half of the series. FE11 notwithstanding, there really aren't that many requirements for going to the Gaiden chapters anymore. I mean, in 3 houses, you have to have certain characters recruited. In FE13 and 14, they require you to pair off your units a lot of the time. And that's not really very hard to do, especially if you know they're there already. I mean, I think my personal least favorite would be basically any of the guidance from FE6 that require you to keep characters alive that don't really have much to do. The fact that you need to keep both Milady and Zeiss alive to get 21x, or the fact that Zealot needs to still be alive to get chapter 20x if you go Ilya route, that sort of thing. I just always felt that was really obnoxious and unnecessary, more so than needing to actually lug Douglas around in 16x, or chapter 16 to get 16x. That's definitely very annoying though, so I'm not denying that in any way. Okay, next question of the episode. Part of me wants to ask something like, what is your least favorite dog shit, boring, lame ass, stupid map from this fucking game? because that's very on topic for this episode. But no, I'm not going to ask that. Instead, what I'm going to ask is, okay, here's something. So we're going to be talking a little bit about Kishuna this episode. Kishuna, one of Nurgle's morphs, the magic seal that we fought back in Chapter 19X. And there is a part later in the story where his story sort of wraps up. However, we're going to be doing that chapter towards the end of the game. I think probably in the last episode of this game. And around that time, we're usually asking very specific questions. You know, who is your favorite character? What is your least favorite or favorite guide and map? That sort of thing. So with that in mind, I do think that it would probably make the most sense to ask this question here, any Kishuna-related questions, because this is the last time we're going to see him until the last chapter of the game. So that's my question this time around. What is your opinion on Kishuna? Because honestly, I'm excited to talk about him. You know, I definitely think that he's one of the most interesting aspects of this game. I don't think he's necessarily really well written. I think there's a lot of things about him that don't make any sense, or that feel like half-baked. But I think that they get started on some interesting topics here, and I am looking forward to talking about them. It's probably one of the only things I'm looking forward to about this episode. Okay, I'll stop being a doomer, because there are parts of this you know, this set of chapters that I liked, you know, like the Kishuna stuff. I actually think that the narrative, the story this time around is pretty solid. I'm mostly just kind of annoyed about the gameplay, because the gameplay in these chapters was really obnoxious a lot of the time. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Yeah, I think that's everything. Make sure you tweet your answers at I'mAMeleeKirby on Twitter, or email turnwheelpodcast@gmail.com. I don't believe anyone. Let me just double check the email, because I don't think anyone's emailed me. I checked it not too long ago. But let me just double check, because you never know. Yep, nope, nothing that I can see. Okay, so yes, why don't you go ahead. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into our chapters for the episode, starting with Chapter 21, New Resolve. So at the beginning of this chapter, we get a pretty big exposition dump from Nils about sort of the events that led up to, you know, Hector and Eliwood arriving at the Dragon's Gate, everything going on with Elbert, what it is that Nurgle actually wants, what his plan is, all of that stuff. Essentially, they tell us that Nurgle is planning on using a substance called quintessence, which is technically something we've heard about before. I never did bother looking into whether the use of the term in FE4 was a fan creation, but I have to assume it was. But if you're playing, you know, if you're playing the series all the way through, and you're using fan translations to play the unlocalized games in English, then you will have encountered the term quintessence before in Chapter 3 of FE4. However, this is the first time that we're seeing it in, I mean, obviously it's the first time we're seeing it in official localization. This is the first game in the series that's been officially localized. So quintessence is essentially life essence. It is someone's life energy. And Nurgle is able to take it from people, you know, by killing them, obviously. And he's planning to use a whole bunch of that quintessence to open the Dragon's Gate, which is what we bore witness to at the end of last chapter. His plan from there is to have Ninian and Nils call the dragons to Earth from wherever they are. So at the end of the Scouring for the war with the dragons all those years ago, they fled. The dragons went through the Dragon's Gate. Not really sure where they ended up. There's a popular fan theory that they may have ended up in Archanea, but that's obviously completely, you know, headcanon. No one really knows that for sure. There is a I don't know if it's quite as popular, but there is a subset of that theory that Nils is actually Forseti from FE4, which, I mean, there's basically literally no evidence for that, but, you know, whatever. It's a fun headcanon, and I'm not gonna, you know, get mad at anybody for feeling that way. Regardless, though, that's what he wants to do. He wants to open the Dragon's Gate and then call dragons back through to do something. Do they actually speculate on what he wants in this exposition dub? I actually don't know. I did actually make a little bit of a mistake here. The kids, Ninian and Nils, are the ones that can open the dragon's gate. And Nurgle can call the dragons after the gate is open. He needs quintessence to do so. I thought it was the other way around. He could open the dragon's gate and needed quintessence, but the kids needed to call the dragons. That is not the case. It is flipped. Doesn't really matter. It doesn't make any practical difference, at least as far as I remember in the story. But I didn't want people complaining to me about it because I knew that was going to happen. So I actually do kind of like this next bit. Nurgle needed a whole bunch of quintessence, right? And it's like, okay, well, some people have a little bit of quintessence. If you're like lame and dumb and stupid, then you only have a little bit of quintessence. But if you're cool and awesome and based, then you have a ton of quintessence. Not many people like that are out there, though. It's basically, Elbert was one of them, and probably a few of the people traveling with Hector and Eliwood, probably Hector and Eliwood themselves. But for the most part, people don't, like, the average person does not have very much quintessence. So what do? Well, it's probably a lot easier to just kill a whole bunch of people rather than trying to find a specific handful of people that have a whole bunch of quintessence. So that's what he tried to do. He tried to manipulate Darren into instigating a war, and the idea behind that being, a whole bunch of people would die and he could come in and collect the quintessence afterwards. Kind of a smart plan, and they kind of talk about how evil he is for doing that, which is fair. Nils says a couple things about Elbert. He mostly just talks about how cool Elbert is. And Elbert, he does report that Elbert said that he would rather sacrifice himself than see his homeland embroiled in the flames of war or something like that. Now, of course, this isn't at all consistent with what we see from what we hear about Elbert did. I can't speak. This isn't at all consistent with what we heard of Elbert doing from, Eric and Layla. Because if you remember, there was a pretty consistent plot point that it seemed like Elbert might actually be kind of into the idea of overthrowing Ostia. It was probably not true. This seems to confirm that it wasn't never true, and he was just kind of, pretending to feel that way to get close to Darren. But that's not like it just feels like a weird plot thread to leave open and to never address. I mean, I'm assuming that either they figured, people will probably be able to fill in the gaps, which is fair enough. I think that's reasonable to expect people to just assume that Elbert was lying when he expressed interest in starting the war. Or they wanted to do more with this, but just didn't have the time, or they forgot, something like that. I'm not 100% sure, but either way, it doesn't matter. And this is basically never brought up again. So I just wanted to give one final nod to that as, a kind of interesting, consistent plot point that just kind of gets dropped here, which I thought was a little bit unfortunate. Eliwood and Ninian have a little bit of a scene here, which is really nice. Eliwood and Ninian is sort of pushed as the semi-canon couple in this game. I say semi-canon because it is possible for Eliwood to end up with either Lynn or I believe it's Fiora, one of the Pegasus Night Sisters. And yeah, I mean, I did a whole thing about that when I talked about Lynn and Fiora shipping, or not Fiora, Florina. But in terms of the story gives most attention to her and Eliwood. There's a unique ending if her and Eliwood have a paired ending, or have a support together by the end of the game. The ending is slightly different. There's a few things that indicate that honestly, I really wish that they just hadn't made it possible for him to end up with anybody else. I mean, I do like the idea of having flexibility to change the outcome of things. I don't know. I think love stories are at their best when you don't have to stretch it super thin like that. I mean, I'm going to make everything about Trails because that's what I'm wanting to do. Trails in the Sky has a really genuinely nice love story between Estelle and Joshua. And then as the series goes on, that gets kind of progressively worse with the later protagonists, because Lloyd, to a certain extent, not as bad, but then especially Reen, they can all end up with a ton of different characters, and they can't focus that energy into writing romance for a specific character, in the same way that Estelle and Joshua. But On the other hand, that's not really like a practical criticism, because romance in Fire Emblem, even single romance options, like Marth and Sita, Alm and Celica, Sigurd and Deirdre, like some people really like Sigurd and Deirdre, to be fair. But most of the time, these aren't handled any better than Eliwood and Ninian's romance is anyway, so I don't, it's whatever. It's not really that big of a deal. I do like Eliwood and Ninian a lot. They are definitely my favorite pairing for him. And I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent. They just have a nice scene here that I'm a big fan of. And at the end of the scene, Ninian senses some enemies coming, and they get ready for battle. There is a scene right before the battle starts where Nils and Ninian are, they're just talking. They get told to hide, but Ninian wants to go out and help. She wants to help protect Eliwood, and Nils decides that he's going to give her some of his power. This is the narrative justification for why only one of them is playable at the same time. Is because like Ninian is really low on power or low on energy until Nils is able to transfer some of it over to her through some nebulous magical method that we're not really ever given any explanation on, but it's fine. So yeah, now Nils is kind of out of commission for pretty much the rest of the game, and Ninian is going to be our primary dancer, which is great because we have our dancer back. It's been a while without one. Since the beginning of Eliwood and Hector mode, we haven't had one. But now Ninian is here to save the day, which is great. She does have her Nina's Grace. I'm pretty sure she has it here regardless of whether or not... In fact, I'm 100% positive that she has Nina's Grace regardless of whether or not you got it back in Lin mode, whether you did the Gaiden chapter to get it. Because, in fact, you couldn't even use it in in Lin mode. That was really dumb. I don't know why they didn't let you do that. Alright, so this chapter is pretty straightforward. It's a kill boss. We need to defeat the boss, whose name is Oleg. He is on the bottom right corner of the screen, I think on both versions, Eliwood and Hector. It's a Fog of War map, which is not fun, but it's also a town and city map, which is generally, some of the best maps are in that environment. So it's kind of a give and take. I do think that the Fog of War here is particularly annoying because there are a shitload of Wyvern Knights who are going to come in and kill you, and you can't see them coming because they're coming out of the fog. And if you put a weaker unit in the wrong spot, well, too bad. Hope you like resetting. Or just letting them die. So in my opinion, Fog of War and flying enemies that can bypass, like natural terrain, like the walls, the houses, that stuff's really annoying. In fact, in maps where there's a lot of natural cover, like those walls around the city, the alleyways between houses, those maps benefit a lot, I think, from flying enemies because they can bypass those, and it makes it a lot more challenging to manage your choke points if you have someone that can just bypass them. However, putting Fog of War on the map makes it a lot harder to do so because you don't know where they're going to be able to strike. I don't know. I could go on, and I have, about the reasons that I don't like Fog of War, but I think you basically get the gist of it. I'm sure most of you probably agree with me. We actually get 2 Fog of War maps this time around, which is super fun. Not at all, but... So I leveled up Bartray a little bit. He's doing okay. There are so many fucking wyverns in this map, guys. There are so many on Hector hard mode. I don't know exactly how many. It felt like they were coming forever. It is a kill boss map, so there's nothing stopping you from just going over and killing the boss. In fact, the boss is a warrior who is extremely easy to take out. Basically any fast unit with a sword can kill him in 1 or 2 rounds. So it's not too bad if you're just willing to end the map early, but I wanted to make sure that I got all the items. There's plenty of houses to visit here. There's some shops. You haven't had the chance to do some shopping in a while, so this is a good opportunity to do so. And just in general, visiting the arena, there's a lot of reasons why you might want to prolong your time on this map, but every time you do that, it's kind of gambling with the wyverns and whether or not they're just going to fuck you over. which is kind of interesting. I don't actually think that's a bad concept. I think the fog of war makes it a lot worse, though, again. I do kind of like the idea of this map, but it's kind of just held back in practice. I will say this is I said there are 2 fog of war maps. That's only partially true. If you're playing on Eliwood mode, actually, I think Eliwood, normal and hard, or Hector normal mode. I'm pretty sure it is only Hector hard mode where the other fog of war map we're going to talk about is a fog of war map. So thankfully, if you're playing on any of those difficulties, then this one is just that one is just a regular map. This one is the only fog of war map that is in this section. Overall, it's fine. I don't really have much positive or negative to say about it that I haven't already said. So I think with that, we can move on to what happens after the map. There's a nice little scene here where Eliwood and Hector are just goofing around, kind of like messing with each other. And it's just a nice reminder that like Eliwood is kind of snapped out of his funk. He was in a really big funk. I mean, understandably so, of course. His father had just died. But, seeing him and Hector goofing around and having a good time again, it's just a nice way of indicating that Eliwood is starting to heal and move on from what happened, which is great. We get a visitor in the form of Isadora. Isadora is actually a character that we've seen before very briefly. I believe she was in Chapter 11 Eliwood mode, right at the start. Basically, she is a knight of Faerie, who Eliwood made sure to leave behind to help protect his mother. However, when the messenger with word of Elbert's death got to Eliwood's mom, she listened to the whole thing. There's a nice little description here about how that went down. She listened to the whole thing and basically told Isadora, "You're going to go protect my son because I've already lost my husband. I'm not losing my son too. I can't handle that." So Isadora is now traveling with us. And yeah. She's a pretty good unit. I think a lot of people. I mean, I think the landscape around Fire Emblem unit discourse is starting to change a little bit over the past few years. I think the work of people. I mean, especially Mecha. I'm just going to talk about the elephant in the room. But there are certainly other Fire Emblem YouTubers out there who have done similar work. Trying to get people to stop. Treating units as if they're mutually exclusive. Like you can't use both Marcus and Lowen, or you can't use both Isadora and Lowen. Isadora is a good unit, and she needs to be taken on her own merits. There's not really, especially in this game, there's not really any downside to just using a bunch of paladins. So even if she is the worst paladin, which, especially on Hector hard mode with no Lyn mode carryover, I think that's even debatable about whether or not she is. But even if you assume she is, she's still a good unit. The worst paladin is still a good unit in this game as far as I'm concerned. I'm not going to be using her, I don't think. I've made a lot of changes to who I'm actually using. I think I even made a note to talk about that somewhere later. I had a plan of who I was going to use. I think I even read out the list of units, and then I haven't really been sticking to that at all. I've just been kind of using characters who have been fun, who have been getting good level ups, that sort of thing. Sticking to a team to go through the entire game with it doesn't usually work out in my experience, at least not for how I play Fire Emblem more recently. I think I used to do that all the time, but it's just not as fun for me anymore, I want to experiment. I want to have a good time. So anyway, that's all there is for actually, no, technically there's a little bit more. There is a scene here with Nurgle, an enemy POV, if you will, where he has been, we get to see the full scope of his injury. He got hurt pretty badly by Elbert there at the end of Dragon's Gate, and he needs a little bit of time to heal. And he's specifically, not because he thinks that they are, he's worried about them getting in the way of their plans. He might be a little bit, but the way he phrases it is, I want revenge. The guy who did this to me is already dead, so I'm going to take my revenge on Eliwood instead. So he gets Sonia, who is a character we've heard about before, I believe, to basically get the Black Fang to target Eliwood. And we're going to see the ramifications of that shortly, especially in the next, mostly next episode. I don't think it really comes up again for the remainder of this episode, except in another enemy POV scene later. All right, so next up we have Chapter 22, which is called Kinship's Bond. Right at the beginning of this chapter, this is the scene I was referring to. I actually didn't think it happened until later, but I guess it's right right after the scene with Nurgle, basically, we get introduced to the Four Fangs. The Four Fangs are basically the top dogs of the Black Fang. Other than Brendan Reed himself, who is the leader of the Black Fang, these are the Fangs with the most authority, the most, generally the most powerful and the most well respected. We have the brothers Lloyd and Linus Reed, who are the sons of Brendan Reed. We have Ursula, who doesn't really have much of a connection as far as I know to everything else that's going on. And then we have Jafar, who is a character we've met before. He was the one who killed Layla, and he showed up at the end of Dragon's Gate to stop Ellawood and co. from escaping. So these are the guys that we're going to have to contend with more as the game goes on. And it does a good job introducing them to us. I particularly like Linus and Lloyd's introduction here. Because they can tell that something is up with their father. I mean, they're a little bit dumb, don't get me wrong, because they can definitely tell that something's going on. Sonia is basically giving orders to them, and they're like, so these are our father's orders, right? Like, he's on the same page as this. They're not deferring to her. They want to make sure that everything is going through their father. Unfortunately, Brendan Reed is well and truly whipped at this point, and it's never, properly explained what the hell this is about. I mean, you can infer that maybe she's putting some kind of spell on him, maybe she's using some sort of magic influence, but at least as far as textual evidence is concerned, we're left to assume that she just really rocks his fucking world every night, and that's enough for him to give her full autonomy over his entire fucking assassin organization. That is what we're left to assume. He is not doing too hot. Basically, Sonya just tells them that they're going to start targeting Ellawood, and they leave it at that. So Ellawood and co. decide that it's time that they start appealing to others for some help. They can't do this alone. So what they're going to do is they're going to talk to Uther, who is Hector's brother, leader of Ostia, and at least for all intents and purposes, the leader of Lycia. There we go. I don't know why it took me so long to think of that. I don't remember I have written here in my notes, Lynn potshot at Hector, which is probably a pretty funny line that Lynn has, but I unfortunately do not remember. Let me see if I can find, here we go, Kinship's Bond and script. What did she say? Oh yeah, this is a fun little line. So Hector's talking a little bit about how Uther's coming. He says, he's traveling in secret with very few attendants. He's skilled at this sort of thing. There's no need to worry. And Lynn says, how unconventional. It must run in the family. Hector says, and what exactly is that supposed to mean? And Lynn says, nothing. I'm very much looking forward to meeting him. Just a fun little bit there. Okay, so this next part I'm confused by. Nils passes out here. And that's not really the weird part. I mean, there's any number of reasons that could be happening. He's been through a lot of traumatic experiences recently, for one thing. But then also we know that last chapter he did give a lot of his energy to Ninian. And maybe that's just taking a little bit to catch up with him, right? So he falls over. And, they're like, okay, well, we got to go take him somewhere to get treated. And Ninian is insistent, very, very insistent that they don't move his body. And I have no idea what this is about. There's no explanation that I can think of that makes any sense at all. At first I thought, I honestly thought this would be pretty cool. I was like, maybe he is still, he is in human form, right? But maybe he is about as heavy as he is, as a dragon. Now, that doesn't really make any sense and isn't, internally consistent with, Ninian being on that boat, right? Or, actually, Ellawood picked up Ninian, in Lin mode too, so that wouldn't make sense at all. But I wasn't thinking about that. What I did think about though is how this is directly contradicted. If that's what they're going for, that was directly contradicted by something that happens next chapter as well. Basically, them being as heavy as dragons doesn't make any sense. And it's probably not what the implication here is supposed to be. But if it's not, then I certainly have no fucking idea what it is. I mean, the conceit of this chapter is that it is kind of a defend map because you have to make sure that the enemies don't get to Nils and hurt him, but he's if Ninian could resolve all of this by just having them move Nils to a different place. I don't know. Maybe it's just some sort of like weird thing where the energy transfer process makes it harder for him to be moved safely. I don't know. It's just never explained, and I would have liked some sort of, at least like a offhanded explanation where she could be like, oh, he's still really weak from giving me all his energy. I if you move him, you might hurt him or something like that. I don't know. Anything would do it. But all she says is like, please, just don't move him. Just don't move him. That's pretty much all that she says. We get a quick enemy POV between Eubens, who is the leader here. We actually have heard of Eubens before. If you're playing Hector mode, he comes up in one of the earlier chapters as being like a mercenary company associated with Darren. However, Darren's gone now, so it's like, well, what are they doing here? I believe they're looking for. They heard rumors that the Black Fang is going after Eliwood, so they're gonna try to kill him to get like quick favor with them, I guess. And Heath is here. Heath is a member of Eubens' mercenaries. We did actually meet him, I believe, as well in chapter 15 as well. He was there briefly. He is like, yeah, I'll fight with you guys, but he is he doesn't like attacking women and children. So he's like he's nervous about all this. He found out he heard that there's women and children here. He doesn't want to go through with the attack. But Eubens basically just says, no, you got to do it anyway. So we'll come back to Heath in a little bit. For right now, though, what happens next? Oh yeah, okay, that's basically where the chapter begins. So Isadora, this is where I was going to talk about Isadora in terms of gameplay. I mean, honestly, I already kind of did. I didn't have much else to say about her. She is quite a good unit, She's a paladin, so she has full control over the weapon triangle. She has high movement. She can rescue drop people. Basically everything that you would associate with like Marcus or whatever, Isadora is capable of as well. Her stats are worse for sure, but they're not like that much worse. In fact, hold on, let me compare Marcus's and Isadora's stats. Alright, let's see here. Marcus, Fire Emblem, 31 HP, 15, 15, 11, 10. Yeah, 15, 15, 11, 10. Let's just leave it at that for now. Yeah, so her max HP is about the same. Her strength and skill are not that much worse. Her defense is not that much worse, and her speed is actually pretty significantly higher at 16 as opposed to Marcus's 11. Now, of course, Marcus will have had the whole game to grow by this point, or like half the game, whatever. But Marcus is not a growth unit. Like his growth rates aren't bad. But you're not reasonably going to expect him to catch up with that speed stat and to far outstrip her in terms of strength and skill. So he's not like, Isadora is honestly not even that much worse than Marcus, if you ask me. She even comes with an angelic robe, so if you feel like using her, that's a very easy choice on who to give that to. She benefits from it a lot. I honestly really like Isadora. I wasn't planning on using her, and I probably still won't, but I kind of want to use her if I ever play through this game again. I feel like she's a very overlooked unit. I do quite like her. Yeah, that's about all I have to say about her. I think she gets a bad rap. Give her a try the next time you play through this game, maybe, if you feel like it. So there are some secret shops on this map. They're not very good, if I do say so myself. There is a... Where are the... Wait, oh, that's the script. Okay, where's the secret shop data? Okay, yeah, the secret shop has some physics staves, which is nice. Barrier and unlock are okay. Torch is okay. We're about to hit a Fog of War map after this. Chest keys are going to come in handy. Most of these can be like kind of useful, but not super useful. I didn't spend too much money here. I think I bought like a physics staff or two, and then that's about it. This is technically a defend map. You can end the chapter early by killing Eubens. On Eliwood mode, this is like extraordinarily easy. In Hector mode, it is a little bit harder, and on Hector hard mode, I did actually I ended up doing the full defend map just because like it was honestly kind of challenging. A lot of my units were kind of getting their shit pushed in a little bit. I'm not gonna lie. So I didn't want to overextend too much. I didn't have any characters that I thought could handle it, except for maybe like Marcus, and he Yeah, that's essentially the gist of it. I did enjoy this map quite a bit on Hector hard mode, because it did make me feel like I had to play defensively. Again, some of my units were able to handle big onslaughts of enemies, but most of them weren't. So I did have to be careful about where I put my units. Most of the units that could deal really easily with the physical guys were not able to deal with the magic units, of which there are many. This is the first map. I think there were some monks last chapter, but I think this is the first map, maybe in the entire game, that throws like a lot of magic enemies at you, and that's not easy to deal with. Oh, chapter I think chapter the pirate ship one had a shitload of shaman. So there have been ones before now, but this is definitely like the most recent, and it's not always like this. So I thought that was kind of cool. And there's also an anti-turtling incentive in the form of a thief who is going to come and steal some treasure. One of them is is like some gold. So if you take too long to kill him, or to get the treasure yourself, then that gold, I don't believe you can get that back. I know in some games, the gold becomes like an item that they're carrying, so you can get that back. But in this game, I'm pretty sure it's just completely gone, if you let him get a hold of that gold. So we have two recruitable characters here. One of which is Heath, who we've already talked about. You can recruit him by talking to him with either Lynn or your main lord. And his recruitment conversation is pretty unremarkable. He just says, I don't want to hurt women and children, so I'll fight with you instead. Heath is a really, really, really good unit. I'm going to be honest, and this is going to show my whole ass a little bit. I don't actually like using Heath very much. I know, like, I'm not going to sit here and argue that he is not a good unit, or that he takes like an excessive amount of effort to use. I don't think that's true. But what I will say is that it's usually a little bit more effort than I personally want to expend. He does require some resources, especially on Hector hard mode. He's not like, I think he gets hard mode bonuses, but he's not like, he's kind of really fucking slow. And it takes a couple levels to get him. I mean, you can give him a speed wing. That's the main thing. If you give him a speed wing, then he's pretty good. I don't think he's not very high level, so it is going to be a little bit before he can promote. So he doesn't have that get out of jail free card. Let me just double check that, because I'm kind of talking out of my ass. I just want to make sure he's not like level 12 or something. He's level 7, so he doesn't need that much investment before he can promote. But he's, I don't know. I don't like using him all that much. But he is a very, very good unit. I don't think there's a single game in the series where there isn't at least one good Wyvern. FE4. Okay, besides FE4. I'm pretty sure that at least every other game has at least one Wyvern that's really fucking good. And Heath is no exception. I know a lot of people really like using him, and I think that's completely valid, even if I don't personally. The other recruitable character is actually our last returning character from Lynn mode. We have Wrath, and Wrath is pretty cool. What's funny about Wrath is that if you skip Lynn mode, he actually comes with B bows. Whereas if you did Lynn mode, he starts with C bows and then carries over his bow rank. So skipping Lynn mode actually makes him slightly better. At least, like his stats are probably going to be a little bit lower, but probably not by that much. So, yeah, if you ever want to use Wrath, you should consider skipping Lynn mode, as weird as that sounds. But, of course, most units, are heavily detrimented by not doing Lynn mode. So if you're thinking about, like, who you want to optimize, both, a Cavalier and Florina are made significantly better by doing Lynn mode. So definitely don't just skip Lynn mode. This is a very hyper-specific reason to skip Lynn mode that's probably not going to apply to most people, but I thought it was interesting and worth bringing up. I did already do a good amount of talking about Wrath in the Lynn mode episodes, so I'll keep it brief here. He is a nomad in a game, a bow-locked unit in a game where enemy phase combat is basically reigns supreme. He's not nearly as bad as some of the archer characters, Will and Rebecca especially. But he, because he has a horse, that is really good. And he starts off, especially again if you skip Lin mode, he starts off with a really good bow rank. So there are definitely uses for him. However, he's just not he's not going to be able to make too many waves. I don't remember what level he joins at. He's level 9, it seems like, if you skip Lin mode. So he only needs one level before he can promote and not only get that extra point of movement, but also get swords, which allows him to be a little bit more effective on enemy phase. So there's definitely ways that you can make Wrath work. I'm not going to pretend like he's terrible or anything. But as far as mounted units go, he's definitely, I would say, near the lower end. But mounted units in this game are really good, so it might be worth using him if you feel like putting up with a bow unit. So the method of ending this map, if you kill Eubens, is pretty much what you would expect. If you kill him, then his followers are like, oh, they got Eubens, we got to get out of here, et cetera, et cetera. If you actually wait out the timer, basically he's like, Eubens is like, I am out of here. I'm quitting the mercenary business. I'm getting the fuck out of here right now. He runs off. It's so funny. As I mentioned, this map is really easy on Eliwood mode. On Hector hard mode, I did have a bit of a hard time. There's a lot of units here. A lot of them are quite strong. There's a lot. Reaver weapons are everywhere in this chapter. Reaver weapons are a mechanic that unfortunately doesn't get to pop off as often as it really should. But they're pretty neat. They reverse the weapon triangle and double its effects. I think I've already explained Reaver weapons, but if I haven't, that's basically what they do. And they can be really weird and annoying to play around because not every enemy has a Reaver weapon. So even if you do think about and figure out how to counter the Reaver weapons, you'll occasionally get like another unit that doesn't have a Reaver weapon thrown in there, just to spice things up and make it more annoying. So, overall though, I think this is a pretty fun map on Hector hard mode, and on Eliwood normal mode, just like with basically every map, it was so easy to the point of being really boring. And this is the point where I need to, I think this is especially applicable for the next few maps, but I think I'm going to talk about it here so that you guys kind of know what my thought process is on going into these next couple maps, because this is about where I started thinking about it. Doing this game twice is taking a bigger toll on me than I originally expected it to. I'm still going to continue doing this up until I get to that chapter in Eliwood mode. I am weirdly fixated on playing every single map that I possibly can, but it's if you are even remotely good at Fire Emblem, Eliwood mode is so easy. It's so brain dead. And it's a real shame that content is locked behind playing a different mode. I don't get it, man. I really don't know why they did this. I cannot think of another place. Well, I can think of one other place where it's definitely going to be relevant. For the most part, though, this isn't going to be a problem in most games. Most games you're going to be able to access all their content on one playthrough. FE8 is, of course, one of the major exceptions. If you do FE8, you're going to need to pick between Erica and Ephraim. I'm planning on doing both of them, but those maps don't I'm not going to have to do 2 playthroughs of that. I'm just going to do the same thing I do with every route split and save state at the beginning, and then choose my path based on whatever factors I want to afterwards. So I'm not going to be playing every map twice for the first chunk of FE8. Of course, where this is going to get really annoying and where I'm wondering if I should rethink my strategy here is 3 houses, for obvious reasons. But we'll get there eventually, maybe when we get there. Okay, so the cutscene here, this cutscene doesn't really make any sense for a variety of reasons. Uther arrives and they tell their story, and Uther believes them. And they're like, what should we do about this? And they're like, well, we could tell people, but no one's gonna believe us. And That's stupid. I'm just gonna throw that out there. It gets progressively more stupid as the game goes on, and they get more and more important and reputable people on their side. I mean, I think particularly, eventually, of course, we get Pent, who is one of the most important people in all of Etruria. And if they don't want to believe him, then like I don't know what the fuck is going on. Now, of course, I can forgive this, pretty minor, inconsistency, or I guess like logical fallacy, because the real reason that this needs to happen is because no one can find out about what happened in this game, because then it would be really weird if no one mentioned it in FE6. If the war against Nurgle was widely known, then someone somewhere would have mentioned it in FE6. I mean, it still doesn't make any sense that, like, Merlinus never brings it up, Eliwood never brings it up to Roy, Marcus never brings it up, all these guys who know about this and what happened. Oh, this is interesting. Apparently, Ninian can also recruit Heath. And I didn't mention this, but I figured it would be obvious. Lyn recruits Wrath. I just wanted to throw that out there. Sorry, I'm just looking at the script right now because I feel like there's something I am forgetting. Uther, I don't know. I don't even remember. I'm looking through the script. I can't even remember where Uther. So they come to a couple of conclusions during this cutscene. First of all, they figure out that Nurgle is looking to target Byrne next, and Byrne. That's a pretty big deal because Byrne is a really powerful military force, and if Nurgle gets his hands on it, quote, we're done for. So we definitely don't want that to happen. So that's the plan. They're gonna go and go to Byrne and make sure that Nurgle can't get away with whatever he's trying to do there. However, Uther is like, well, if you got a little bit of time, you should head over to Misser, which is the desert on the southwest corner of the continent. And Hector very reasonably points out that is the wrong direction from where they're trying to go. However, Uther insists. He says that there is someone there who might be able to help them, and he describes them as a living legend. So they decide to take Uther's advice and to go to the desert, the desert of Nabata, and try to figure out what he's talking about. If you're playing Hector mode, there is a nice scene here between Hector and Uther. Both of these guys, they've never really gotten along very well. They kind of snip at each other. But this is a nice moment between the two of them. Hector points out that Uther doesn't look so good, and Uther gets in a quick jab about how he realizes that the fate of the world is on Hector, and that makes him very nervous, or something to that effect. And it's just a nice little scene there that I appreciated. Okay, next up, they decide to go to Nabata, which leads to chapter 23, Living Legend. This is a desert map. They are in the desert, and there's a nice little moment here where they're all walking through the sand, and Nils is like, "Oh, I'm so tired, I can't go on." And Hector decides to lift him up over his shoulders, which is so cute. I love this moment a lot. They're just goofing around, having a fun time. There's even a CG for this moment, which I think is really cool. Eliwood and Ninian have yet another scene here, which is actually shown on both Eliwood and Hector mode, which I thought was interesting. I mean, it's good that they're not just cutting out important content from Hector mode, don't get me wrong. But if the idea here is that one of them is from Hector's POV, and one of them is from Eliwood's POV, doesn't it make more sense to maybe, especially, we get a lot of screen time for Ninian. It would be really nice to get a little bit more screen time for Nils. I think that could have been nice if he and Hector had more of a complex moment here. That could have been really neat in Hector mode, but, whatever, I guess. So we cut to a POV, not an enemy POV, but an NPC POV, where we see Gandalf the Grey. It's not actually Gandalf, although it definitely looks like him. Is a old man with a full, thick beard, and long, flowing white hair. And he is in some sort of weird blue room. Now, of course, if you played FE6, then you would recognize this as being the place where they sealed not Arcadia. It's in Arcadia. It's the place where they have Forblaze in that game. But if you haven't played FE6, since this was a lot of people's first game, then I don't even know how you would describe this place. It's like a lot of blue walls, and there's like a weird futuristic sounding OST almost. Almost, it gives me like Breath of the Wild Shrine vibes, if that makes any sense. He's chatting away. I believe Louise is also here. He's talking with Louise, and he's basically giving her a play-by-play on what's going on the surface. He tells her that that some bandits are approaching. I don't know if he uses the name Pent, but basically he says like, oh, you're the person that you came with. Is being approached by some bandits, and she's like, oh no, and he's like, oh, are you worried about him? And she's basically like, no, it's just kind of a bummer that he's probably going to be late for dinner, which is really funny and characterizes Louise really well. It's one of the few moments of real characterization that she gets, where she's like, no, trust me, I'm sure he's fine, but I just want to make sure that we're all eating dinner together, because that sounds really nice. I don't know. I like Louise here in this scene. I don't think she really gets much else as the game goes on, unfortunately. Athos has a moment here where he reflects on, the people coming from Lycia, and he has a line. He says, "Once it begins to turn, none can halt the wheel of fate, but as long as there is hope, people continue to try. They do not know the despair that awaits." Now, I don't know what that means, and I don't think it really ties into the overall themes of the game, but it sounds pretty cool. And I'm sure that if you really wanted to, you could figure out a way to tie that into the themes of this game and Athos's basically non-existent character arc. But I'm not going to do that. Maybe my media literacy is in the garbage, but I don't think that has shit to do with fuck all. So I'm not even going to touch it with a 10-foot pole. It is kind of a cool line, though. Okay, so we cut to Pent's POV. Pent is approached by some bandits, Paul and Jasmine, who are, maybe I'm just being a little bit, I don't know if alarmist is the right word, but, this is a pretty fucked up, effeminate gay stereotype, I think. It's definitely not great. There's plenty of people talked about this. I'm not going to be the person who puts the discussion to sleep, obviously. But play the game and you let me know what you think. Because it's definitely. It's not atrocious or anything like that. It's not horrible. It's just it's okay, maybe it's a good thing that we moved away from this sort of as the series went on. Although there are a few more instances of it in later games too, which we'll talk about. I think this is probably the most egregious, though. I think it started in FE6, and then it this is the worst it ever gets, if I'm not mistaken. And then there's a similar archetype in Radiant Dawn, and then I believe it again in Awakening, and then in Fates also. They're basically yeah, we'll take all your money and your whatever treasure you're holding or whatever. And Pent's like, oh man, that sucks that I'm going to have to, ruin the sand with your blood. He doesn't actually say that, but it's essentially the vibe he's giving off. He's more mildly annoyed than anything else. And that's how the map begins. And if you are playing on Hector Hard mode, you will very quickly realize that this is a Fog of War desert map. Just like Arcadia. And as much as I complain about Arcadia, I think this map might actually be worse. It's hard to say, right? I don't know if I would consider this a worse map overall, because this map is only Fog of War sometimes. There's 3 other whole difficulty modes, including most people's first playthrough, where this isn't going to be a Fog of War map. And I think that helps a little bit. I think Arcadia being Fog of War all the time brings it down a little bit. But man, if you're playing the version of this map that has Fog of War, I feel like it's so much worse. It's not really Arcadia is hard, but at least it's hard in an interesting way. I still think it's bullshit, but at least it's hard in an interesting way, right? Where it encourages you to take advantage of the terrain. There's wyverns you have to be careful of. I think Soup said it best when he basically described it as a boss chapter or a benchmark chapter, right? And it really feels that way. It's got hands, but in ways that really make you feel like you're working for it. This is just annoying. This shit's just annoying and also boring. It manages to be both at the same time, which is the cardinal sin of fucking map design. I'm honestly barely even going to talk about how this works as a map. I'm going to talk about it a little bit, but like there's really nothing interesting going on here. There's desert items that you can get, like there are in a lot of games. Some of them are pretty good. They're not as good as they were in FE6. The FE6 ones went really crazy. But the ones here are still pretty good. Phila's Might is one of them. Phila's Might is another bracelet. There are 4 over the course of the game, and Phila's Might is arguably the best one. It essentially is Nina's Grace, but instead of boosting defense by a whole bunch, it boosts attack by a whole bunch, which is a big deal. So if your thought process here is that, oh, I need to hurry up and save Pent because otherwise he's going to get jumped and killed by a bunch of guys, if anything, you're saving the enemies from Pent. If you let him, Pent could solo this entire chapter by himself. And you don't want him to do that because there is a Gaiden chapter associated with this map, which I believe requires you to get 700 experience in this chapter, which is like, that sounds like more than it really is, but it's not a small amount either. So you definitely don't want Pent to go around killing every single enemy. You really do need that experience. There is a recruitable character on this chapter who is he's the other requirement for getting the Gaiden chapter. You need to get 700 experience and recruit the recruitable character, who we'll talk about right now. So there's a scene, he shows up, he's green during the, after the cutscene where he shows up. You can talk to him with your main lord. And there's this, the recruitment conversation for Hector is really funny because he's like, oh man, finally, it's really hot in this desert. I'm going to like take a break here in the shade. And he's like, wait a minute. What's causing this shade? And he looks up and Hawkeye is there, and Hawkeye, we don't really get like a good like scale, like an image to scale Hawkeye off of. There's no like group shots, like he's never in any CGs or anything like that, but the implication is that Hawkeye is enormous. I mean, Hector is not a small man by any stretch of the imagination. He's a pretty big guy. Hawkeye is towering over him. Like, bro, what the fuck are you doing out here in the Nevada desert? You need to be out there on the court catching rebounds. Like, he is probably pushing, 6.5, 7 feet tall. He is quite large. And as a unit, Hawkeye is really, really good. He is a pre-promoted Berserker, which is one of the best classes in this game. He can use hand axes, which is really important in an enemy phase focus game. He has that built-in crit chance, which goes off a lot. He has a really high starting axe rank, so if you wanted to use like a killer axe for more crit, you could have him use a brave axe, a lot of effective weaponry like hammers and things like that, halberds. He's really, or even just like, man, he fucking kicks ass with a basic iron axe. Hawkeye is so good. And I love using him. I don't know if I'm going to use him this playthrough, but I really like using him a lot. Definitely like one of the best pre-promoted characters in the entire game. Like if you are ever doing a draft of FE7 and like you need like a good like second, probably not second pick, but maybe like third or fourth pick, I would honestly go for Hawkeye. He is so handy, and he joins like relatively early. We're about halfway through Hector mode at this point. So yeah, there's a lot of good use you can get out of Hawkeye. He honestly helps a lot with Cog of Destiny. I had the only other time that I've played Hector hard mode that I can think of, I was doing a draft where I had Hawkeye, and he made Cog of Destiny his bitch. Like he fucking went off on all the monks he was kicking ass. Is so good. I love Hawkeye. There is a house in the desert where you can have someone visit, and who is there but Faye from FE6. This doesn't make any fucking sense. Arcadia is nearby, but like she's definitely not in Arcadia right now, unless it's like just off screen and we can only just barely not see it. I suppose that's possible. But either way, it's just a nice little Easter egg that I'm glad is here. So one last thing before we move on to after this chapter, because I'm already out of things to say about it. Like I genuinely don't have anything to add gameplay wise. It's Fog of War. It's desert. What do you want from me? It's awful. Like, I fucking hate this chapter. It's so bad. It's got to be one of the worst in the game so far, if not the worst. One thing I wanted to add though is that you can get Pent and you can bring him over to your side. You can pick him up with a flyer or something and bring him over. Based on what we know about Pent later, it's really, really weird that he does not have a conversation with Urk. Honestly, like, even if they take him away from you at the end of this chapter, Urk should probably be able to, like, recruit Pent, to be honest. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Urk and Pent, if you don't know, Pent is Urk's teacher. They know each other very well. You would think that there would be at least a talk conversation here or something, but there's just not, which I thought was very strange. And that's everything. You kill off all the bandits. You kill Jasmine and Paul, whatever the fuck his name is. There are some stealable items here. Make sure you check out Paul and Jasmine's inventories, because depending on the version you're on the mode you're playing, there's various different items that you can steal from. I think one of them has like a white gem, and then one of them has a guiding ring on Hector mode, something like that. I needed that guiding ring actually because I forgot to get one from. It was somewhere on the Dread Isle that you can get a guiding ring that I didn't end up grabbing. Okay, after the chapter's over, Pent, walks up and is like, "Hey, what's going on?" He knows Hawkeye, so he and Hawkeye kind of bro out for a second. And they decide that they're asked, they ask what you're doing here. You explain that you're here to look for a living legend. And Pent is like, "Oh yeah, yep, I know exactly who you're looking for," and decides to accompany you to meet the guy. Hawkeye is going to come as well. For the record, Hawkeye is like the protector of the Nevada desert. He is actually Igreen's father, from FE6. That I don't think that ever really comes up, but I think it does in supports. But like. Igreen's identity as the protector of the Nevada desert doesn't really come up in FE6 very often from what I remember, so, it doesn't really matter. You are just, if you unlock the Gaiden chapter, which is what we're going to talk about next, the last chapter we're going to talk about this episode is 23X. The way that they introduce you to this chapter, technically this is the end of 23 still, you are walking through the desert, and just on your way to meet Athos, and there's just quicksand. And you fall down. There's no, like, how does getting 700 XP make you more likely that you're going to fall into this quicksand? It doesn't. But, I guess they just needed some sort of Gaiden requirement. I don't know why recruiting Hawkeye couldn't have been the only Gaiden requirement, but whatever, I guess. It also doesn't make any sense that you could say no to this. Like, no thanks, I'm not gonna fall in that quicksand. It's reminding me of that fucking the AI generated meme that people are have been redrawing because fuck AI, or at least fuck AI generated images. I know that there are plenty of useful. I know AI is something that's been around forever, and there are plenty of useful applications for it. But I hate AI generated art. I think it's awful. And there's that one Dr. Mario video that is so goddamn funny. And people have been redrawing it of like the image of Luigi, like putting his hand up like, no, thank you. That's me to this quicksand. I gotta get I get like Kishuna doing that angry Mario face, or Hawkeye or somebody. I don't know. Anyway, you fall into the quicksand, and that's how chapter 23X, Genesis, begins. So this chapter actually starts off with a really cool scene. This is where Kishuna comes into the picture. I did mention that we would be talking about him. This is essentially a flashback from Kishuna's perspective. I'm just gonna read this whole monologue from Nurgle because I think the whole thing is really interesting. This is a flashback to when Nurgle first made Kishuna, for context, and we get a little CG here that's pretty cool looking. So Nurgle says, "I name you Kishuna. You are the only morph to whom I have given emotions. It won't suffice to simply refer to you as a number. It is said man was sculpted by the hands of the gods. If so, then you, who were sculpted by these my hands, and I, whose labors gave you breath and life, what are we then? What does that make us? In your fabricated heart, which I gave unto you, what is it that you believe, Kishuna?" And I really, really like this line because it implies a lot about Nurgle's character. I mean, first of all, I think the implication that a lot of people are going to get from this is that Nurgle has a bit of a god complex. You know, he's like, well, God made humans and I'm making you, so like, you know, what does that make me? And like that, there's a very easy read there. But I do also want to point out that that's not exactly what he said. You know, he does say, like, he's questioning. He's like, so like, what does that make us? What is the relationship that we have? And he puts it on Kishuna. He says, with your mind, you know, your emotions, your heart that I've given to you, what do you think? He's not telling Kishuna, like, yes, I am a god. Yes, I have given you life, and that gives me, like, power. That gives me dominion over you. It's entirely possible that this is a Nurgle who, I mean, we know it's, how do I word this? The timeline of this entire game is so fucked, so it's hard for me to be consistent with this. It's hard to know exactly where this falls in the whole spectrum of Nurgle's life and fall, because on the one hand, it has to be fairly late because we know that he didn't start experimenting with quintessence, or like creating morphs until like relatively recently. But on the other hand, if he was fully gone off the deep end at this point, which he probably was, but like that begs the question, why would he bother doing this? This serves him no benefit. I think there's like a line, I don't think it's in this chapter, but it might be towards the end it might be towards the end, like the last Kishuna chapter, where Nurgle's like, okay, well, you have emotions, but that makes you useless to me. But like, did he really think that giving him emotions would make him a better killing machine? Did he think that that's what would happen? It really seems like he was more doing it for the sake of wanting to see what he could do, you know, testing the limits of his power, which in itself is kind of like ethically dubious, right? If you're just gonna give someone life and sentience just because you can. Like, that's kind of fucked up if you think about it. But like, if I think about this anymore, I'm gonna have like an existential crisis, so I'm not going to. But you know, essentially, I just think this whole thing is really interesting. I think there's a lot that you could read in here. You know, some of it's more likely than others. I do think that Nurgle is fully off the deep end at this point. That's like, it's really hard to argue that he isn't, based on what we find out both before and later on in the game about the timelines of things. There's just no realistic way that Nurgle wasn't full, like, I need to get a bunch of quintessence and call dragons mode at this point. But it does raise an interesting question of what his goals are, what his designs are, if he has any other interests or thoughts about anything, you know, now with this hyperfixation that he has. And then I think the more interesting question, the one that I would honestly push back against, is like, what does Nurgle see himself as in this moment? What does Kishuna see himself as? What does Kishuna see Nurgle as? You know, these are questions that I think we can assume the answer to. You know, it's very easy to assume that Nurgle thinks of himself as a god and treats himself like one. But you know, he doesn't say that, and it would have been very easy for him to call himself a god, but he doesn't do that. And I think that that's really interesting and leaves a lot of room for interpretation. I like the scene a lot. Unfortunately, it is preceded by what is quite possibly the worst chapter in the game, and one of the worst chapters in the series so far. I hate this chapter so much. It is so goddamn boring. Alright, I'm getting ahead of myself. There is more story to cover. The characters fall and hit the ground running. Didn't make sense not to live for fun. Your brain gets smart, but your head gets dumb. They find some secret ruins. They figure out that these are like secret ruins. They're like, oh, they talk a little bit about what a magic seal is. Pent and Hawkeye already seem to know what a magic seal is. They decide that they need to go fight off Kishuna, and that might help them escape. Even though they don't, you know, they could just like look for a door. There doesn't seem to be anything stopping them from just finding a door. But you know, they're just like, yeah, you know, maybe we should kill the magic seal. Maybe that'll get us out of here. Okay, so that's where the gameplay begins. Kishuna is here. Kishuna, of course, is the magic seal. So because of the way this chapter is laid out, It makes it a lot harder to avoid him. I do kind of think that's a neat concept. The problem is that the magic seal idea in general is just really obnoxious. And the fact that it's so much more unavoidable in this it's like really hard to deal with. The map layout makes it really annoying to get around because a lot of the rooms are blocked off by walls. Some of them are blocked off by keys. So if you don't have enough keys, you don't have enough lockpick uses, or a thief, then that can be really annoying. I just don't like this map. Play it and you'll kind of see what I mean. Some people might be like, oh, it's not too bad, but I don't. Does anyone? Let me ask you this: does anybody like this map? Does anyone think that this map is really cool and awesome and fun to play? Because if you do, that's fine. I just don't know, like, I don't know who you are. I've never met anybody with that opinion. Some people might debate about whether it's, like, just kind of boring or egregiously bad. But I'm pretty sure most of us can agree that it is a bad map, which, I think, that's all I gotta say about it, honestly. It's not a lot of fun. Oh, and in Hector mode, there are a couple of very key differences. First of all, a lot of the enemies have siege tomes, and because the map is pretty small and confined in a pretty small space, they can just shoot you like from pretty far away on the map. Which wouldn't be a problem, you might think, because the magic seal's here. However, in Hector mode, or maybe it's just Hector hard mode, Kishuna disappears on turn like 4 or 5. So you have to kill as many guys with the siege tomes as you can. Otherwise, they're just going to snipe your weaker units, and there's effectively very little you can do about it. I was struggling a little bit on this map at first. The problem was that I was trying to bring Bartray to level him up because he still needs to hit level 5 if I'm going to recruit Carla. My window for that is rapidly shrinking, so I really do need to have him hit level 5 soon. I just need to give him a hammer on a map with some generals and he'll be fine, so I'm not too worried about it. But anyway, as soon as I stopped trying to feed Bartray kills and just actually brought like a full team of competent units, I was fine. I won first try. But man, I just don't like this map. I just think it's really annoying. The room in the center of the map has a little bit of a gimmick where, first of all, if you're playing on Eliwood mode and possibly Hector normal mode, I don't really remember, Kishuna will be in there the entire time. Once you open the door, he disappears and some pretty strong units pop out. He's surrounded by strong units, but the ones that pop out when he disappears they're less strong in terms of stats, but they have silver weapons, which they do drop actually, so you can get some silver weapons. That's pretty nice. And yeah, that's basically it. It's a route map, so you have to kill all the enemies, which is, just the icing on the cake for why this map sucks ass. There is a scene here. That's the end. Yeah, the end of the map. Yeah. There is a scene here that is exclusive to Eliwood mode that's honestly kind of interesting. This is the first time that Eliwood really saw. I guess that's not true. I don't know. I guess it depends on whether 19X is canon. But Eliwood is like, what in the name of all that is decent is that? It has human form, but it's not human. And then Ninian has something to say. Her eyes glaze over. It uses her portrait. I think it's the same portrait that's used when she's like in a trance opening the Dragon's Gate. And she says, that was a creature of heresy. Its existence makes a ruin of nature's most basic laws. And that's like pretty fucking intense. Especially since like Kishuna's just trying to vibe, right? Kishuna, didn't ask to be born. He didn't ask to be created. It's not his fault that or its fault, whatever, that it exists. It's just trying to get by. I don't know. Kishuna's story is honestly pretty interesting. They don't do as much with it as I would have liked, but part of me kind of is glad that they didn't touch that as much as they could have, because clearly they don't always do a good job with the writing. So I think just leaving Kishuna's existence here as like a sad little, side story is kind of interesting. I don't really know, I feel like there's a way you could tie Kishuna into the main themes of the game, especially since, getting all the Kishuna chapters and eventually killing Kishuna is a requirement for the, the only death quote from Nurgle that actually gives a halfway decent explanation of his motives. So maybe when we get to the end of the Kishuna plot line, I'll have some stuff to say about that. But honestly, I do think Kishuna's role here has been really interesting so far, and I'm excited to see how, like, remind myself how that story ends. Okay, we're already going. We're not actually going that long. If you can't tell, I'm trying to get through this kind of quickly just because I'm kind of tired. I've been putting off recording this episode for like weeks now, and I really just need to get it done, but I'm so like I just don't know, man. I'm not really vibing with it, to be honest. So I do want to try to condense a lot of what happens here to to a relatively brief window. So essentially, Eliwood, Hector, and Lynn meet with the guy who I've been referring to as Gandalf this whole time, and he introduces himself as Athos. There is a brief conversation here about the lore of the heroes of the Scouring. They talk about Roland, they talk about Hannon, and of course this came up a lot in FE6. If you're familiar with the story of FE6, then you would know that all of the heroes of the Scouring went on to form and found different countries. Athos, he introduced himself as Athos. Athos was one of the legendary heroes from the Scouring, which would put him at being almost 1,000 years old, or more than 1,000 years old, since he was already probably an adult by the time the Scouring started. And they just have a good conversation about how to stop Nurgle. They come to a few conclusions about what to do. But I'm going to preface all of that by asking a question that I very much want to know the answer to. How in God's name did Uther hear about this? What spy could have... Okay, no, this would have been way before, because Igreen would have still been a child, and Igreen needed to be around for Astolfo to be the spy here. So I was like, wait a minute, could this be Astolfo? But no. But was there like some spy who like heard about Arcadia and about Athos and reported back to, like, what? How could he have possibly encountered this information? We never find out. It's not like that important. It's just like, what the fuck? I would have liked a little bit more on that, I guess, but it's fine. There's also a couple of things here. One thing I did forget to mention from the end of last chapter, or I guess this is technically the end of 23X still, but from the Kishuna wrap-up stuff, Hawkeye like sees Ninian and heavily implies that he knows that she is a dragon. And when they're talking to Athos, he's like, where's Nils? And they're like, well, something outside caught his attention and he didn't follow us. And Athos is like, yeah, that makes sense. I bet something stopped him. And they're confused as to what that means. But essentially, everybody here, maybe not Pent, although honestly, I kind of do like to think that Pent's in on it as well. Everybody here, like Hawkeye and Athos at the very least, seem to be privy to the fact that these two are dragons. And they don't bring it up. A lot has been said about, maybe they should have mentioned it to somebody. But like, honestly, I don't think that it was strictly necessary. I'm sure that they respected why Nils and Ninian wanted to keep it a secret. So I figured, if we can get through this without revealing their secret, then why would we? It's not the end of the world if no one ever finds out. Of course, that does end up coming back to bite them, I think, but whatever. I get why they made that decision essentially. So this is where Pent formally introduces himself. As being the Mage General of Etruria. They talk about that for a little bit. This is yet another reason why it doesn't make any sense. Why, if they decided to go public with this, nobody would believe them. Pent is, an extremely influential nobleman in Etruria. Someone would believe him. Maybe not everybody, but enough people would believe them for it to make a difference. But, again, they can't do that because it would be weird that it never got mentioned in FE6. So they decide that they're going to go to the Shrine of Seals located in Burnt. Again, another place you would know if you've played FE6. Why there? Not clear. Right now, all we know about the Shrine of Seals is that it is home to both. It is home to two legendary weapons, actually. It's home to Apocalypse. And also, I guess it's not technically a legendary weapon. It's a little bit different. But also the Binding Blade. That's where they're going to head next. They don't know exactly what they're going to do there. It's not really explained, but that's the plan. After the end of all of this, if you have a tactician, Athos will give you the Athos Drops, which is a item that you can use on somebody, which I believe it increases all their growth rates by 5%. Yes, the unit Athos Drops are used on has all of its growth rates permanently increased by 5% each. So that's, pretty cool. Give it on somebody who you really like. They do say, like, definitely use it. It's no good if you hang on to it. You must use it. So they really want you to use it. I did skip over a lot of dialogue here about the nature of the relationship between Nurgle and Athos. They're going to spend a lot more time talking about that later. So I think that's where I should spend more of this time on. But essentially, Athos speaks a little bit. He says, like, Nurgle is no longer altogether human. There's just like a lot of stuff here, and it's communicated pretty quickly as go to the Shrine of Seals and burn. That's pretty much all that is communicated in this cutscene. But it's not like a criticism at all. It's just worth pointing out that they spend a lot of time to communicate not all that much. Athos decides to teleport them to Faerie, because that is pretty close to the border of Bern, and it serves as a good place for them to rest a little bit and get started on their journey, the next day or whenever it is they decide to leave. Not Isidora, Eleanor, I believe, or Eleonora, I think it's Eleanor. Ellawood shows up and greets her, and the two have a nice little bonding moment. There's also a little bit of a bonding moment here as they settle in for the night, where your main lord will have a conversation with Hector, Hector or Ellawood. I find the one with Ellawood a lot more interesting, because the one with it implies that a backstory for Mark exists, even if we don't get to see it. Because Ellawood's like, why don't you tell me about all your adventures? You've done some cool shit. I want to hear about that. Hector is basically just like, you're pretty cool. You're pretty epic. Here's some chalky milk, that sort of thing. But the Ellawood one is more interesting to me. Because I mean, first of all, I think it's very characterful of Ellawood to just like fully be like, I want to hear all about you. I think that's a really Ellawood thing to do. So anyway, that's all that I had for this. I skimmed a lot of the story stuff. I hit on pretty much all the beats that I really liked, especially the Kishuna stuff. And I know I didn't spend a ton of time on the gameplay for all these maps. I hope you can understand where I'm coming from on this, because all of them ranged from, again, other than Hector mode version of Kinship's Bond, the other three maps ranged from boring to outright really bad. So I really just didn't want to spend my energy, going over it, I guess. Maybe that's weird. Maybe I should have gone over a little bit more, but hopefully you guys can forgive me for that and at least understand where I'm coming from. If you have any particular comments or things that you wanted me to address in this episode that I didn't get to, please feel free to comment about it on Twitter, tweet at me at ImAMeleeKirby, etc., the whole 9 yards. All right, now it's time for everyone's favorite segment, the Map Gauntlet. And I mean, I've already said it outright a couple of times. My favorite chapter this time around is Kinship's Bond. Unfortunately, it was really only particularly good on Hector mode, and even then, or like Hector hard mode, and even then it wasn't like amazing or anything. It was just kind of pretty solid. What was our previous running chap? It's been so long. I don't even remember what the previous winner was. I think it was Pirate Ship or Dragon's Gate. I remember it was one of those two because I was really hyped about those maps. Whichever one it was, it's not this map is not beating either of those. Kinship's Bond is not as good as either Pirate Ship or Dragon's Gate. I think I did settle on Pirate Ship, but I could be wrong about that. Either way, it is still whatever the reigning champ from last time was. Which I think probably most people expected that. Okay, let's move on to the news. There is not any. Okay, so that's about all that I had. Make sure to answer your question about what you think of Kishuna over at ImAMeleeKirby on Twitter, or email turnwheelpodcast@gmail.com. With that out of the way, I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye. you.